I went to a movie and I'm going to talk about it. Hello and welcome back to Bookish, and welcome to a video in which I discuss the 4 books I've read most recently, and I'll actually give a little movie review and a discussion of a movie I saw, which is closely related to one of the books. So just to go through the books as quickly as I possibly can without maybe probably doing a full review, just kind of share my thoughts about the books. The first book on my list is Victory City by Salman Rushdie. Many of you may be thinking to yourself, hang on a minute, didn't you make a whole video about how you really don't get along with Salman Rushdie's writing and his books? And the answer to that question would be yes. If you watch that video though, I think I might have also said there, maybe it was only in the comments, I said that I did want to give Midnight's Children another shot. It's so widely well regarded, I thought I'd give it another shot, and maybe I thought if I listened to it on the audio that I would, something about it would work better for me than it did on the page. So I went to the Libby app to see if it was available through my library system, and it isn't available on audio through my Libby app, I don't believe, unless I just didn't see it right. But right there underneath Midnight's Children, the electronic version, was an audio book of Victory City. I thought, you know what? Rushdie's brand new book, I'll give it a shot. So I listened to it, and I have to say that I enjoyed it a little bit more than I thought I would. Didn't think it was great. So basically, Victory City is a retelling of the history of an actual Indian kingdom, I believe, that exists, I want to say, in the southeastern part of the Indian subcontinent, as we used to call it. And Rushdie is going to retell the story of this city and this kind of empire, this kingdom, in a really unique way, which is, what Salman Rushdie obviously does. Our story begins when a young girl, I believe she's 9, witnesses her mother and most of the other women in her village immolate themselves after a military defeat in which many of the men from their village, their city, were killed. She's kind of orphaned then. She wanders around. She is taken in by a mystic who teaches her all kinds of religious things and all kinds of, ideas, and, she lives with them. In the course of this, she comes to realize that her body has been inhabited by a goddess, and that this gives her special powers, and one of those is an incredibly long life, as well as the ability to do all kinds of other things. One day, 2 brothers, come to, I think, the cave where she lives with this mystic, and they're in search, essentially, of a kingdom. They fall in love with her, and she agrees to make a kingdom for them. So she literally creates this city and all the human beings in it out of nothing, out of magic. And one of the brothers becomes the king, and she marries him, and the other brother becomes like the really important citizen who's the heir to the throne. And this then begins this retelling of this history to a certain extent. I don't know anything about the kingdom, so I don't know how close to the history it comes. There was retelling of this kingdom through this kind of lens of this woman who has these magical powers and who's going to live for hundreds of years. And so, Victory City has its ups, it has its downs. She's in power, she's out of influence at various times. And, that's kind of the story that goes on. And, if you want to read it, I'll let you deal more with the plot points as it goes forward. But this young woman whose name is Umpakampana, I believe is how you say her name, is the main character and the person the book is focused on almost all the time. And I thought was a really compelling and well-drawn character whose, experiences give the book kind of its driving force. But I oftentimes have a problem with books that are kind of historical retellings, no matter how accurate or inaccurate they attempt to be, in that they oftentimes feel like they get bogged down in details. There are all these details that the author feels like that they have to include in the story, and they may or may not be all that interesting to the people, actually reading the book. And I had that problem with this book as well. Another thing that I recognized or realized when listening to Victory City as an audiobook is that I think I've discovered what it is about Rushdie's work that I don't necessarily like, and that's this thing we would call the authorial voice. There's just something inherently snarky to me or know-it-all to me about Rushdie's authorial voice, and I think it came through in Victory City. Now, maybe it was intentional in that book, and I'm just, applying what I thought about this book to all of his work. I would say is the audiobook narrator does an excellent job. As a matter of fact, I probably wouldn't have kept reading or listening to, or probably wouldn't have kept reading the book if I'd been reading in print, and only finished because an audio because of the narrator. And the narrator's voice sounds a lot like the voice of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy in the old BBC television series.
It is an important and popular fact that things are not always what they seem. For instance, on the planet Earth, man had always assumed that he was more intelligent than dolphins because he had achieved so much.
That's the voice that it has, and that I found that television series to be really entertaining, and those little asides where this voice would read entries from the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy out loud to be really entertaining, and that probably kept me going, which I kind of appreciate. My overall rating would be for Victory City would be kind of a little better than meh, maybe okay, is what I would say about it. Anyway, so that's the first book I read since the last one of these videos I made. The second book I read as a digital book on my Kindle, and that is North Woods by Daniel Mason. This book has gotten a lot of attention, may have won awards, been a finalist for an award, may be a finalist for an award, I'm not exactly sure. A lot of people on BookTube have read it and praised it, and so when I got a chance to get my hands on a digital copy through Kindle, thanks Kim from Middle of the Book March, for just a few dollars, I jumped at it because it was a book I wanted to read. So if you don't know, North Woods is essentially a novel which focuses on a place over a long period of time. As a matter of fact, throughout much of American history, this place, which is, literally in the North Woods, in, I think, Western Massachusetts, near or around the Appalachian Mountains in Western Massachusetts. That's kind of where the story takes place. And it begins with a Puritan couple escaping from their society and going to live there on their own and coming to possession of this land. And then we follow what happens on this piece of land for hundreds of years as different people move in, move out, as the land's inherited by different people, as different homes are built and it falls in disrepair and the trees are cut down, it's turned into something else. And so we follow this piece of land through its history. And I'll say there is some really beautiful nature writing, I thought, in the book, that when the characters are out in nature, or sometimes when Mason's just describing the land itself, I think the writing can be really beautiful, and that's true in lots of parts of the book. But, and there's definitely a but here with this book, because the book follows different characters over a really long period of time, and it's really focused on this one piece of land, it's hard to you can't become invested in any of the characters unless you become invested in the land as a piece of character itself. And I think that works to the book's detriment. It has a kind of episodic, herky-jerky feel, and if you don't find that you get along with, one story or one set of characters, that can make that part of the book, for me, slow reading. And then it picks up pace when I do like the characters and the story that they're telling. I'll just say, like, the third story in or so has to do with a British Army officer who comes in possession of the land and gets involved in an apple orchard and raising apples. And there's a whole lot about apples, which I think was a theme in books last year, which I just didn't find to be that interesting. And the through line didn't really interest me that much either. There's definitely some good kind of looking at the cost of colonialism involved here. But on the whole, I just kind of thought the book was okay, and its episodic nature worked against it. In addition to that, I was surprised by which I'm not going to call it magical realism, I'm going to call it the supernatural, which shows up and plays a hand in the plot in the book. This felt a little bit like, the old Deus Machina thing, where the author is manipulating things in a way which allows things to move forward, which otherwise they really couldn't, so he could work in certain plot elements. That kind of bothered me. And then I think maybe what, bothered me the most is that I really liked a book by the German author Jenny Erpenbeck called Visitation, in which she basically used the same concept, only it was focused on a house in Germany over hundreds of years of history, from, I believe, the 1800s up through World War II. And I thought that book was much better than Northwood's. I thought that kind of concept was handled better than Northwood's, and it was much more affecting to me than Northwood's were. It's possible my expectations of this book were too high, and that's why I found it to be somewhat disappointing. But if I were going to make a list of disappointing, reads so far this year, this would probably be on it. That doesn't mean it's a bad book. That just means I just didn't like it as much as other people have. The third book that I dealt with this month was another audiobook, and that was The Dogs of Riga by Henning Mankell. Henning Mankell was a Swedish crime novelist, and his detective that he created, which was most famous, was Kurt Wallander. And there's a Wallander series that BBC made, I believe, starring Kenneth Branagh, which I really enjoyed, and that kind of got me into reading the books. I've only read two. The first one I read was Faceless Killers, which I liked a lot. And this one was The Dogs of Riga. And essentially, Wallander gets involved in a case when the bodies of two men dressed in business suits wash up on the shore of Sweden near the town where he lives. And he has to investigate the death of these men. This leads him to Riga in Latvia, and he gets really involved in the corruption of the police and the government there. And it really is kind of a look at almost more of the transition that some of these Eastern European countries, freed from perhaps direct control of the Soviet Union, and the things that were happening there during that transition. And it really reads more of like a spy book than a detective novel, even though there's definitely a detective story there. My overall reaction was meh. Wallander here seems less competent and less capable than he is in my mind. He seems to kind of just luck from one thing to another and kind of bumble onto the right answers, which, a lot of times that happens in fiction. And then the fourth book I read was Erasure by Percival Everett, and I really, really like this book. This is the third Everett novel I've read. This novel follows a character named Thelonious Ellison, who's everybody calls him Monk because Thelonious Monk was a jazz pianist anyway. So Monk is our main character, and he is a college professor, but mainly he's a novelist, and the kind of novelist who writes obscure works of literary fiction that people would refer to as difficult or intricate and have a lot of respect for, but he doesn't sell a lot of books. He has a really, he is a black man. He has a really kind of interesting idea about race at the beginning of the book, in the sense that he doesn't really believe in race. He doesn't appear to believe it matters. And this is somewhat, I think, a product of his family life, which if you read the book, you'll get more into. But essentially in his family, his father was a difficult man, and Monk was his favorite child. Monk has two older siblings, a brother and a sister, who both became doctors like their father, but their father never really connected with. And, he thought Monk was a genius, so he treated Monk differently. His father also had affairs and things like that, and ends up, dying in a kind of a tragic way, which I won't spoil more than I just did. Anyway, so, Monk grows up with a really kind of different idea. But when things happen in his family, which force him to return to the family home and take responsibility for his aging mother, he needs money. And he has noticed that another black author, has made a lot of money, get a lot of attention for a novel that she wrote, in which she, uses, it's definitely written in a dialect that people would associate with inner city black communities. And that it's kind of telling that story. And Monk thinks this story is really exploitative. He doesn't think the novel itself is good. He doesn't seem to have a lot of respect for that author, but he is kind of impressed by how much success she's having. And, definitely there's some jealousy there. So when his agent tells him that his latest novel has been turned down by like the 9th publisher, and though what his agent says what they want is something black, he decides to write a book similar, in tone, content to the book this woman has written, and almost kind of as a joke, but also as kind of a FU to the publishing world and the world of book readers to a certain extent, that's saying, if this is what you want, anybody can do this, and I'll go ahead and do it. He changed his name on the book to Stagger Lee, and he comes up with this whole persona over time that he and his agent do, that he is a former convict, and that he, therefore is really, street, which certainly Monk isn't. And this book is just really plays on every single stereotype you can think of from movies and books about the experience of young Black people in poverty inner city. The main character of the book he writes, which by the way, the entirety of which is included in Erasure, is a young Black man who isn't interested in employment. He has 5 children by 5 different women. He's involved and he wants to get involved in crime, all kinds of things like that. And Monk writes this book, and he gets offered a huge advance for it. There's movie deal, all these kind of things happen, and this creates an existential crisis with Monk, which kind of plays itself out in a really kind of, I think, great satire of the publishing world and the book prize world. And I just thought it was really good. One of the things I thought was best about it was the way I thought in which his family dynamics seemed to represent the different ways in which white people seem to think that Black people live, and the stereotypes that white people associate with Black people. And I thought that was really, really good and really, really well done. And that also then leads me to talk about the movie that I saw. And the movie that I saw was American Fiction, which, surprise, surprise, is based on Percival Everett's novel, Erasure. American Fiction was just a great movie. I really enjoyed it. My wife and I went to see it. We laughed. It's cringy. It is emotionally powerful. Jeffrey Wright plays Monk in the movie, and he is excellent. A great acting performance. I think he's one of those people who's truly an underrated actor, and hopefully he'll get the accolades he deserves from this movie. Just a really great movie, I thought. And one of the things I appreciate about it the most is the way in which it was able to kind of include all the ideas, all the themes, all the things that come up in the book, in the movie, without actually covering directly all those things, without having all the same scenes and all the same discussions the book has. It's able to be done in the movie in a way which I thought was really, really effective, along with a clever ending that doesn't exist in the book necessarily, but just kind of a meta thing that happens near the end of the movie. Which I thought was just great, and a really entertaining movie, very well acted, very well written. An incredibly quiet movie in the beginning. We get used to movies always having a soundtrack going on behind the dialogue, and that really doesn't take place here very often. But just a really good movie, which is different from the book. You can go see the movie first and then read the book, and you'll have two different experiences because they are different enough. Anyway, there you go. There's my basic thoughts on the 4 books I read, or 2 books I read, the 2 books I listened to, and the movie I went to see. If you've seen any of these, you have any thoughts about these books, please feel free to leave a comment in the comment section below. And as always, thank you for watching.